Good afternoon everybody and welcome to Toolbox Tuesdays on the channel Will on Safety. This week we're going to cover part 2 of manual handling. So this week we're going to have a look at mechanical lifting aids. Okay, so when we're talking about mechanical lifting aids, they come in all sorts of different guises, all sorts of different shapes, sizes and different pieces of equipment. And can include things like block and tackles, lift trucks, cranes, hoists, scissor lifts, man lifts, a whole manner of things. What we need to think about is when we use some of these mechanical lifting aids, sometimes additional equipment is often needed to either attach or suspend any loads that we are looking to lift. All right, so these different attachments include things like chains, ropes and slings. Eye bolts and hooks and shackles may also be required to stabilise any load. It's really important that these auxiliary pieces of kit and equipment are also scrutinised and tested in accordance with the statutory testing of them. Normally it's under the Lola regulations. So when using mechanical lifting aids, you've always got to follow the manufacturer's instructions and any training you've been given in the use of that equipment. It's imperative you follow both the manufacturer's instructions and your own training to make sure you're using that kit and equipment as it's supposed to be used and in the most safe manner. Okay, so if you are unsure, it's really important to ask, refer to those handbooks or refer to your own training or work instructions as well. Please only use mechanical lifting devices if you're trained and authorised to do so. It's not one size fits all. You've been trained in an overhead crane, so therefore you can use other different types of lifting device. Each lifting device, is inherently dangerous if it's used incorrectly. Also, they bring with each one, their own sort of risks and hazards. So it's really important you only use those lifting devices you are trained and experienced in. You need to consider, there are a few considerations when you're thinking about using any sort of mechanical lifting device or mechanical lifting device accessory. Some of those considerations can include the weight, the load, the size, centre of gravity and the vulnerability to being blown around by the wind. All right, it's really important that we understand maximum loads that lifting device can lift, and I'll give you an example of this. If you try and lift something that's over the sort of maximum weight limit, what that can do is it can put the mechanical lifting device off balance. And worst case scenario, potentially topple it over. And I'll give you an example of this. When I was in the Royal Navy many moons ago, they were doing a dockyard lift and they were trying to lift a forklift truck onto an aircraft carrier. Now this happened in the UK and it was a massive crane they were using. However, they didn't really take into consideration the weight of the forklift truck. So as the crane lifted the forklift truck, the weight of the forklift truck put the crane off balance. It was a dockyard crane that were up and down on rails, put it off balance and toppled the crane over. That caused the crane to smash into the aircraft carrier, seriously injuring the crane driver and a few members of the ship's company that were on board the ship at the time. It's really important that you understand the equipment that you're utilising, and you also understand load limits, maximum weights, the size and centre of gravity of the equipment you're using. All of these considerations are going to come into effect when you're producing a lift plan. That's another thing. If you are going to lift anything, it should be done in conjunction with a plan. If you haven't got a plan for safe lifting, you haven't really considered all the potential hazards and problems you might encounter doing the operation. The next sort of consideration then is selecting the correct lifting equipment. Okay, you don't want to use the wrong piece of equipment for the job. So let's have a look at lifting personnel. Potentially you could use a man lift. You can get man lifts attached to forklift trucks. What you wouldn't do is lift a person on a pair of forklift truck forks, would you? And in the same regard, if you were lifting something that was extremely heavy, you might not want to do that on a block and tackle. You'd use an overhead crane. Okay, so that's another consideration. Attachment method and lifting method, you also need to consider. So if you are using eye bolts and hooks, eye bolts, they should be fully closed off and pinched shut. And in terms of lifting hooks, they normally come with like a flickable catch. So once you clip onto that hook, you need to make sure, one, that the catch is there. I can't tell you how many hooks that I've seen with the catches missing, and two, that it's operating and functioning correctly. If you can't clip the load on to the size of the hook without the catch flicking down, you need to get a bigger hook. So you need to consider that. You also need to consider adjacent hazards. Have you got people working in the vicinity? Have you got kit and equipment that when you start operating an overhead crane, for example, that's going to cause problems in other work areas, and there's potential for maybe smashing the load into a machine or into personnel or other kit and equipment. Weather conditions is another big one. If you're using cranes, for example, or any sort of lifting devices to lift individuals, weather comes into effect. What's the weather doing? Have you got a storm brewing? You don't want to be working at height, for example, in a crane, if there's a thunderstorm brewing. So you need to take that into account. You need to think about protecting people and property around the load. So it's not just a case of lifting up and down and protecting that area. Wherever you're transporting that load to, you need to make sure that people in the vicinity and equipment in the vicinity is protected. The best sort of thing to do would be to segregate the whole area of the operation. That way personnel, kit and equipment, vehicles can't go into that area, and it will create a safe fall area should anything go wrong. Sort of final consideration, I guess, is inspecting the equipment before use. So many of us and so many people on the shop floor and so many businesses, they'll get a third party to come in and have a look at their lifting equipment, at their mechanical lifting devices, and they'll do the service on it on an annual or 6 monthly basis, and then that's it. They'll just go, right, that kit and equipment's good to use, and they won't bother doing a pre-use inspection on the kit and equipment before utilising it. If you think about your Lola tests and your statutory testing, depending on which country you're in, on mechanical lifting devices, a bit like an MOT. So at the time of the inspection, that kit was good to go. However, a bit like your car, as the year progresses or you progress through the months, degradation, things like slings become contaminated with oil, paints, they can get small cuts in them, and that decreases their serviceability. They really need to be checked. If they are contaminated or damaged in any way, they need to be thrown away and replaced. So it's really, really important you inspect any equipment before use. So do a pre-use check on it. That will be my advice to you. Ensure lifting equipment is visibly marked to demonstrate suitability and safe lifting capacity. All right, everything you use should have a maximum lift weight on it, and that way you'll be able to tell, and you're aware that you're not lifting anything that's too heavy for the piece of mechanical lifting equipment you're going to utilise. So ensure equipment is positioned to minimise risk. We talked a little bit about this earlier on. Just make sure equipment's placed in such a position where operating it and moving it around isn't going to interfere with people or other equipment or machinery. So make sure it's positioned to minimise the risk of interacting with anything else. Lifting operations should be planned, supervised and carried out in a safe manner. So lifting plans, especially when using big cranes, are a must. They need to be supervised as well. So you'd have banksmen, you'd have slingers. All these people should have been on specific courses, slinging courses, that type of thing, to be able to properly communicate with individuals utilising lifting equipment. And you need to ensure there's a risk assessment and procedure and communication process in place when using the lifting equipment. It's imperative that not only have you got those three things, but they're also communicated to all members of the lifting team. And they fully understand what's in the risk assessment, what the control measures are, what the procedure is, and what the communication process is. Mechanical lifting aids are used to help reduce the risk of injury to employees through manual handling and other sort of injuries. However, you've got to remember that the aids themselves also carry risks which need to be considered and respected. If you don't do that, you're just introducing a hazard into your operations. So I hope you found that Toolbox Talk interesting. I hope you found it informative, moreover. If you have got any questions, if you have got any comments, please put them in the comments below. Let me know if that was helpful to you. Let me know if I've missed anything or you'd like me to go over anything. I do respond to 100% of the comments I get. If you're enjoying these videos, please hit the like, subscribe and notification bell. That will let you know when I update my next videos. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time to have a look at this video. Please check my other videos out. And remember, folks, safe by choice, not by chance. Until next time, take care.